and welcome to episode 17 of Knitter Matters. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Cheryl Lampard. I'm an image consultant with Style Matters International, and two of my passions throughout my life have been sewing and knitting. And knitting in particular I find just so therapeutic and relaxing. It's a wonderful craft. And I used to have a yarn store in Brighton, England, and I used to teach people how to knit. And it's my pleasure through these Facebook Lives to be able to teach you how to knit too. So this episode and all other episodes are uploaded to our Facebook page, and they're also on our YouTube channel. Thank you if you've already subscribed to it. If not, please do. But they're there as a permanent record, and you can always go back and look at anything you might have missed. We're also on Knittergram. Knitter Matters is also on Instagram. Golly, I'll get the right teeth in today. Anyway, I'm going to sit in my chair. The camera is going to move, and then we'll get started. So today we're going to talk about two things. And I didn't get the acronym wrong for work in progress, which is commonly called WIP. I didn't get the acronym wrong. This is something else. A WPI means wraps per inch. Okay, I'll take that out of the way. So what does wraps per inch mean? What it actually means, let me just see if I can, I've got another iPad going here, so I was hoping I could see if you make any comments. I was hoping I could see them, but at the moment I can't. So anyway, we'll get going. So it's a term commonly used by weavers, but it's useful for any yarn user to identify the weight, i.e. the thickness of a yarn, if you don't know what it is or if the label is missing. Now, essentially what you do, and I've got an example here of some that I did earlier on today. You wrap the yarn tightly round a ruler. Doesn't matter on the size of the ruler in terms of the height of the ruler. It could be a narrow one like this, or it could something like this. Really doesn't matter. What is important is how many wraps you get to the inch. And that will tell you, that is a guide for telling you what type of weight the yarn is. And when we say weight, we don't mean physical weight, it's the thickness. It's a gauge of thickness. It is a bit confusing, but you just literally wrap round. I held these with a bit of sticky tape because I knew I was going to be moving them around. And you want the wraps to lay side by side here without overlapping. So then how do you tell what you're looking at? Well, if you go to, there are several charts online. This was one I printed off from Ravelry. I'll put the link in for that afterwards. And this tells you the weight of the yarn and how many wraps per inch you could expect. There's also a very nice one on the website for the Craft Yarn Council. If you just put in CYC or Craft Yarn Council, the website will come up. That I couldn't print off, but it is online. So you can look at that. I'll put the link in afterwards, yes. But what I did here, you've already seen me use this chart before, and I can show you that again afterwards if you don't have it, so you can copy it. And what I did, I just wrote down underneath the different weights of yarn. So you could do something like that and keep that handy. So using this as a guide, I can then look at how many wraps I've got. So I did a very fine yarn here on this one. And I know I actually ended up with 35 wraps on this one. 35, if I count them. And that's my 1 inch there. So you can see that's my 1 inch there. Okay. Now, according to my chart here, if I've got anything between 30 and 40 wraps, that means it's what they call a zero weight. It's a lace weight yarn. And I know that that one is a lace weight yarn. So I'm good with that. That's perfect. The next one along, I didn't have a label on this one, so I can't remember what this was. So this has turned out to be 22 wraps on this one, according to my chart there, giving the weights. That's a number one. That's a number one. It's a super fine because I've got 22 wraps. When I go to this one is thicker. Now I happen to know that this is a number 4 weight, which is considered medium. I have 11 wraps on this one. And if I look at my chart here, yep, that ties up nicely because I should have anything between 9 and 12 wraps. So that one I know. Okay, it's a medium weight yarn. And then finally, this one, this is the really thick yarn. I ended up with 7 wraps here. This one is a little bit off because I do have the label for this and I know it's a super bulky yarn. But according to my chart, I have 7 wraps. And according to my chart, I would be in the bulky category here. But in fact, the yarn itself is labeled as a super bulky, so it's saying 5 and 6. So it's a little bit off there. The point I'm trying to make here is that this is just a guide. There are variables, including the yarn content, if you're doing it with a synthetic or a natural, and how tightly you wrap the yarn. If you really stretch it out, then it's going to appear to be thinner, especially if it's kind of a soft loft yarn. If it's tightly twisted, then that won't affect it too much. But if it's a yarn that sort of stretches, then it's going to skew the amount of wraps that you can do. Now, I will tell you that some knitters and some authors of knitting books don't like this system, the wraps per inch. They don't like it because they don't think it's that accurate. But I think it's a very useful thing when you don't know the yarn weight. If you get a bunch of yarn in your stash and the labels have gone, or somebody gives you yarn, or you know, it's a long time since you've looked at it. It's a really helpful thing. But needless to say, always do a gauge test or tension square. And that's the only way to know for sure how your yarn will knit up and behave. Okay, so that's our WPIs. When I was sort of putting together today, I thought our theme with wraps and short rows sounded like a bit like a menu for a barbecue house, and I can't help but think of short rows as something that I'm going to eat, but I'm not. Okay, so now we're on to short rows. And the reason I'm putting these here is that if you want to look again later and just go to one section of the video, then me putting this here hopefully will make it a bit easier for you to do that. Okay, I'm just trying to see if I've got any questions coming up. Okay, if not, and do please feel free to put questions in the comments box. If I can answer them while we're going along, then I will. If not, I will get back to you afterwards. So short rows. What are short rows? It's probably better to call it a short row shaping technique. Now, they're partial rows of knitting, and they're generally used to shape or curve various sections. So you can see here, this is started off as a regular piece of knitting for my sample, but this side is much wider here than this side because I've added in rows. But you can also see where I've added in these rows, and they're a little bit clunky because I haven't used the technique that I'm going to show you in a minute. But why would we even need to use short rows? Well, generally they are used to shape a garment. They're used to slope shoulders, and it avoids those jagged step-like edges that you sometimes get on a shoulder edge where it sort of goes up, and especially with thicker yarns. It can be used for sock heels. It is used for sock heels, for contouring those, hats, curved yokes. There's lots of other uses. And unlike decreases and increases, which are also used to shape the knitting, short rows don't necessarily alter the number of stitches that you have on your needle, although it does affect the length of the fabric, as you can see here. Now, I want to show you this pattern because this is a good example how short rows can be used as a design feature. Now, this is a pattern. It is available for purchase on Ravelry. It is not a free download. Okay, it's called a chine cozy, and if the camera can, I think you can see that. It's actually a long sort of scarf or stole, and the designer has used this technique of short rows on one long edge to create this really nice frill, and it is lovely. I actually knitted this up once, and as I often do, I gave it away as a gift, so I haven't got one to show you, but it's a very nice little pattern. I'm going to flip this over so you can actually see better how this is an all short row technique. It's not put on afterwards. It's done in the bulk of the knitting, which is a garter stitch scarf or shawl. And this is the result. You get this really nice frill. And interestingly, when I was looking at this pattern, it's called Chine Cozy. The designer is Lynn Hamps. It is available on Ravelry, and I can post the link for that afterwards too. But interestingly, when I was looking, lots of patterns on Ravelry do give you the WPIs to expect for your yarn. So if you wanted to use a different yarn, yes, you're going to have to do a gauge swatch. But on something like this, it's not critical because it's a scarf. It's not a garment that has to fit. But it does give you a clue if you want to use a different type of yarn than the one that they suggest. It tells you the amount of WPIs, and on Ravelry they often give you the amount of wraps per inch that you might need, so just so that you know that. Anyway, let's get back to what I was talking about there. So let's bring this back in again. So as I said, this is an example of how to do short rows, and essentially you go along and you turn. But the problem is just turning as it is, you get these clunky holes and it's ugly. Now, that's not to say that you don't use short rows and have eyelets when you turn. You might in a lace pattern, but it's not a very refined way of doing it. It's not a very smooth transition. Whereas I did another sample, and I'll put them side by side so that you can see. Can we see that? Okay. Where the transitions are so much smoother. You can hardly see them there. Yes, I can see them because I know I've done them. But they're so much smoother. Whereas if this were in a sweater or something, you don't want to see these ugly, clunky things. So how do we make these lovely smooth transitions for our short rows? Well, I'm going to show you. So I've got, it takes a little bit of practice. I'm just going to get myself, swivel my chair a little bit so you can see. So what I'm going to do here, let me get in the right place so you can see what I'm going to do. So for knit rows, it's a slightly different technique for knit rows and purl rows. So I'm going to show you the knit rows first. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to knit, say, in the middle. Now your pattern will tell you how many stitches you do before you turn. And in this technique, that's, let's do 8. In this technique, if it says, let's say it says to knit 8, then turn. Well, I'm going to knit 7 because what I need to do now, and remember this is my knit side, I'm going to bring my yarn forward. I'm going to slip the stitch that's on my left hand needle off. I'm going to wrap my yarn towards the back. You can see this little bump here where I've wrapped it. I'm now going to put that back on the left hand needle. Okay. Now I turn, I physically turn. Okay. And now I'm going to purl my back on the row. So there's short rows, remember. I'm trying to increase my amount of rows on one side. I'm not changing the number of stitches. Okay. But now, when I turn, you can see there, I still have a hole. Okay. So now I need to be able to hide that in some way. Now I'm going to knit up to where just before I made that wrap. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is put my needle there. I'm going to lift that wrap and I'm going to knit that with the stitch that's already on my needle. I am going to do this again in a minute, so don't worry. Now I'm going to knit the rest of my row. Now your pattern will tell you how many times you need to turn, but this is the technique to use. Okay. You can already see, well, actually you can't really see where that is. What we do know, we've got an extra row, but there's no nasty hole. I'm going to show you again how to do this. You just have to bear with me while I knit and then pull back. It takes a bit of getting used to, but they're strangely addictive when you do these short rows. Okay, just bear with me while I pull back, because we're doing these short knit rows, and in a minute I'll show you how to do it on a purl row if you have to do that, depending on your pattern. Okay. Purling as fast as I can go here. Stay with me. Okay, nearly there. There are other techniques, but this one I find probably the easiest once you get the hang of it. And it works a treat. Right. Turning now to do my knit. Okay. So you can see there, we already have more rows there than we do over here, but you can't see that there's no hole, there's nothing clunky there. I'll show you how to do it again. We're going to knit 7 stitches. So if your pattern said knit 8 stitches and then turn, you want to knit 7, and then you want to make sure your 8th is the one that is the slip stitch. So if you remember, we're bringing that yarn forward. Okay, it's in the front of your work now. We're slipping this stitch and we're slipping it purlwise. We're wrapping the yarn round and we're turning. And now we're just going to, I'm sorry, I didn't put the stitch back. I'll show you that again. I screwed up there. So I did 7 stitches. Let me show you again. I've knitted 7. I'm bringing my yarn forward. I'm slipping that purlwise. I'm wrapping that. Now I put that back on my left hand needle. Okay. Now I'm going to turn. So this isn't knitted yet. This is just loose there and my wrap is round it. But I'm carrying on to purl my short row. Then on the next row, I've got to do something with those wraps to hide them. So you can see, if I left it like that, I'd have a horrible hole, which I don't want. Knit, knit, knit. Now I get up to just before, again, I stop just short. Okay, now I'm going to lift that up. This is the wrap, and I'm going to knit that, and if it's easier for you, put them both on the right hand needle and then knit them. Okay, and then I'm going to carry on knitting to the end of my row. Okay, or I would do, except I want to show you the purl version. Okay, much neater, and by the time that's all blocked out, that'll be really a nice smooth transition. So no holes there. Let me show you now on the pearl. I'm going to actually take these needles off because these are slightly shorter than this one. Are you okay? Sorry, my camera is struggling a bit here. So we're going to do the pearl version now. It's similar, it's just a little different. So I'm going to still work on those 8 stitches, if you like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to knit 7, or pearl 7 I should say. Then I'm going to take my yarn to the back. I'm going to slip purlwise. I'm going to bring that back round. And now I'm going to turn my knitting. Okay. You see that will wrap round this stitch. This is a knit row. Again, it's the same principle. If I was to, you can see the wrap there and you can see the hole. Excuse me. I'm going to do back to my pearl row. And again, I'll show you this in this again. Oh. So what I'm doing this time, when I get up to my wrap, it's all about wraps today, isn't it? So here is my wrap. Here is my wrap. This is the bit that I wrapped. So I want to go in here. I want to kind of pick that up from the back. Put that on my needle and purl it at the same time. Okay? I'll do it again for you in just a second. Oh, I've split the stitch there. I've just messed that up a bit. Okay, let me show you again. So let's say I want to do another wrap here. I'm going to put my yarn at the back this time. I'm going to pick that one off. I'm going to turn that. I'm going to put that back on, that way round. I'm going to turn. I'm going to knit to the end of my row. I've got to get back up there. For the sake of expediency here, I'm going to turn around here and go back on that so you don't have to watch me purl along the rest of the row. Okay. This is where my wrap is. I want to pick that up. In fact, I'm going to pick it up that way. And I'm going to pull that stitch, those stitches like that. Okay. I've done something wrong there. That's not looking great. Oh yes, no, I'm okay. I'm okay. That's because I split the yarn there. By the time that's blocked out and I've fiddled about with that, I can do better than that actually. But there you go. You're not going to see that. And in fact, it's that side that matters anyway, because you're purling. This is if you're doing a short row. Forget that one, that's where we did the gap. This is where we're doing short rows on the purl side. Let me finish the rest of that. Because you might be purling on you might be doing a short row and the purl side is facing. There you go. Forget that one, that's where I deliberately turned. But you can't see that. You can see it more on the right side. But this is your right side if you're doing it on a purl side. Okay? Really nice, easy transitions. Not that one, that's where I turned in the middle. But you can see you've got extra rows there, you've got more rows there than you have there. So that's how you do your short rows. It does take a bit of practice. It does take a bit of practice, and you need to, you don't want to forget to hide those wraps. Otherwise you'll get holes and you'll get clunkiness throughout your knitting. This is what you're aiming for. You're just nice, smooth transition like I showed you before. The more you practice those, the more you'll actually enjoy them. And they are strangely addictive. They really are. It's a nice, smooth transition. And they just become second nature. But take your time with them. They're really nice to do. So, as always, practice makes perfect, and progress is better than perfection. So, in the meantime, let me know if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer them as we go along during the week. And never get stressed about your knitting. It's supposed to calm you down, be therapeutic, so never get stressed about it. So in the meantime, stay calm, stay well, keep knitting, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.